conflict, strife, altercation, fight, competition, disharmony, clash, dissent, confrontation, hostility, animosity, war. Did you know that in the English language, there are over 100 different ways to say the word conflict? No, seriously, I can keep going. Dispute, contention, combat, struggle, opposition, disagreement, animosity. You can even use old-timey words. Fisticuffs, scuffle, fracas, feud, tumult. For real, it just doesn't stop. Rumble, skirmish, clash, dust-up, brouhaha. The fact that we have so many words to describe conflict gives us a glimpse into how significant a role it plays in our lives. Conflict is just something we will have to deal with in our lives, and more often than not, it's just uncomfortable. When it arises, you may be like me and try everything in your power to avoid it. Or maybe you are more inclined to confront it. No matter if you naturally run to or from conflict, it's inevitable. There will be times when others hurt you and times when you hurt others. Therefore, we all need to know what to do and how to respond to conflict, not if, but when we experience it. That's why in this video, I'm going to give you 4 action steps you can put into practice when you experience conflict, as well as 3 keys to navigating confrontation conversations. So stick around to the end to find out how you can handle conflict when it comes your way. How we address conflict is so important because little things left to simmer will eventually boil over, destroying relationships in the process. Did you know that the Bible actually talks about this? Jesus himself lays out a step-by-step plan for how to handle conflict between believers. Let's look at what he says in Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. But if you are unsuccessful, take 1 or 2 others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. From these verses, we see a simple 4-step plan to put into action when another believer sins against you. Step 1, go to the person privately. This first step is crucial. We have to start here. Sometimes the other person might not even know they've done something to offend you. Going to them privately gives them an opportunity to realize that they've offended you, apologize, and change their behavior. Yes, this conversation will be awkward. Yes, it will take some initiative on your part, but if the other person is willing to hear you out, the end result is reconciliation and peace, which should be the desire in our relationships with others. However, if they are unwilling to hear you out, you will need to move to step 2. Take 1 or 2 others with you and try again. Continuing to argue with the person who offended you isn't going to solve anything. You need to bring others in. But when we think about bringing others into a conflict, it may be tempting to do what Iron Man and Captain America did when they had a major disagreement. The 2 of them gathered up the troops in support of their cause and went to war, fighting with each other until the whole group was torn apart. It's easy to bring in people who are automatically going to be on your side, but remember, the goal here isn't winning an argument. The goal is reconciliation. Therefore, I suggest bringing in people who are able to be somewhat objective, those who are outside of the conflict, those who the other person will listen to and respect. The person you bring in may also help you see things from the other person's perspective. Oftentimes, we fail to realize our contribution to the conflict, but rarely is one person totally at fault. Hopefully, this second conversation will cause the other person to realize that they've offended you, apologize, and then change their behavior. But if that still doesn't work, then move to step 3. Take your case to the church. The previous steps are pretty self-explanatory and they make sense on their own, but this one can be a little confusing, so let me give you some context. Back in the time of Jesus, the synagogue functioned like a lower court. So if something small happened, like your neighbor kicked a soccer ball through your window, you'd take your case to the local synagogue, where they would decide who was right and who was wrong. But today, most churches don't really function that way. So instead of standing up in the middle of church on a Sunday morning and stating your case, it makes more sense to involve trusted leaders from the church in the conflict by asking your small group leader or your pastor to sit in on the conversation. The goal isn't that those people will be judge and jury. Instead, having church leaders present is another way to help make sure that everyone is able to be heard and that the conversation stays civil. And hopefully, this third conversation will cause the other person to realize they've offended you, apologize, and change their behavior. But if that still doesn't work, then Jesus gives us one last step. Move on, but keep your distance. Jesus says that if the other person refuses to listen after steps 1 through 3, you should treat the person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. Those are some harsh words. What does that even mean? Well, basically, that means that from that point forward, you might be better off keeping your distance from that person for a while. You are to still love and honor them as we are to for anyone, but you may not need to restore the relationship to its prior standing. At this point, you also have a decision to make. Are you going to let it go and move on? Or are you going to harbor resentment in your heart? Speaking from my own experience, nothing good comes from holding on to your anger when someone else has offended you. Now, before we move on, I want to point out 2 main ideas from this passage alongside our 4-step plan. This first idea is this: God's heart is about reconciliation, not revenge. The motivation behind each step in this process should be to see the relationship restored. Did you notice how Jesus doesn't talk about punishment or revenge in these verses? He never says to make the other person pay for what they've done or do things that make the other person feel the consequences of what they've done. Everything Jesus says points towards a specific goal, and that goal is for the relationship to be restored. The second idea here is that gossip doesn't have a place in this process. Jesus tells us to start by keeping the conflict private rather than going and telling others. Now, I want to be absolutely clear that Jesus is talking about conflict, not abuse. If you are ever in a situation where someone makes you feel unsafe, do not feel like you have to confront that person on your own. When conflict includes the threat of harm, you shouldn't have to handle it by yourself. Please go to a trusted adult who cares about you and tell them what's going on. But assuming we're talking about conflict and not abuse, this is where many of us veer off course. Instead of going to the person who hurt us, we end up telling everyone else about how they hurt us. This may make us feel good in the moment, but it doesn't really solve anything. Actually, it only causes more hurt and makes matters worse. All right, so we've looked at each step of Jesus' plan and pointed out the main ideas behind it. Now let's wrap things up by uncovering 3 keys to handling this kind of confrontation. Number 1, be ready to forgive. When we confront someone who hurt us, our goal should be for our hearts to align with Jesus' heart. We should view this conversation as an opportunity for reconciliation. And the truth is that it's impossible to reconcile if we're not willing to forgive the person who has offended us. It's a hard truth, but the Bible says in Colossians 3:13, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." Avoid the urge to approach this conversation with a desire to win or to be right. Remember, the goal is reconciliation, not revenge. However, I'll be the first to say that this isn't easy. It's okay if you need to cool off and take some time before you have this conversation. If you're not ready to forgive the other person, you're probably not ready to confront them about it either. Confronting someone before you're ready to forgive is actually more like picking a fight than it is seeking reconciliation. Key number 2, choose your words carefully. Jesus' process is extremely helpful, but that doesn't mean it's easy or simple. Even if we follow his plan step by step, there are plenty of ways that things can still go sideways. Even when done with the best of intentions, confronting someone who has wronged you can be interpreted as an attack. And that's why it's vital to choose your words carefully. Something that helps me is playing ahead by writing down exactly what I want to say and practicing it a few times in front of the mirror. Now, I know that sounds really silly, but planning out your words gives space to remember that God's heart's about reconciliation. It helps align the words you choose with that goal. I encourage you to plan out the words you say before you have this kind of conversation, and spend some time praying, asking God whether or not the words you've prepared are what He would want you to say. In Psalm 19, verse 14, David gives us a great example of what this type of prayer might sound like. He says, "May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." Key number 3, be direct but kind. In my opinion, this is the most difficult part of the conversation. On the one hand, you need to be super clear about how the other person's words and actions have affected you. But on the other hand, you don't want to unnecessarily escalate the conflict. Ephesians 4:15 says, "Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church." Do your best to find a balance between being direct and being kind. Let me give you a few quick ways that you can still be kind as you confront the other person about something they did wrong to you. First, you want to get straight to the point. Instead of beating around the bush like I so often am tempted to do, clearly state why you want to talk to them and explain that your goal is to put the hurt behind you. This will help set the tone for that kind of conversation. Second, don't yell or raise your voice. Even if you're still angry, that will only make the other person get defensive. Do your best to speak to them with the same tone and volume that you would like them to use when they respond to you. And lastly, allow them the chance to respond. There is kindness in giving the other person the opportunity to respond or ask questions in the middle of this conversation. It's not just one-sided, all you talking. Give them that chance. It's possible they didn't even know you were upset, so it's okay if they need some time before they respond. Confrontation, it isn't easy. It can be awkward, uncomfortable, and sometimes even scary. But it is necessary if we want to build and maintain healthy relationships. Thankfully, the blueprint that Jesus gives us is a great place to start and a clear path for moving toward reconciliation with other believers. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Confrontation.